Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, hope you've all been doing well. In this video, what I want to discuss with you guys is why I think it's an absolutely fantastic time to build a Ryzen based PC. I had originally planned this video to be a top 5 or top 10 CPUs to buy list, or a CPU recommendation video, depending on the budget and scenario. However, since it's currently around the time of the holiday season, and with big days like Boxing Day coming up, I thought I'd look at things from a broader perspective. With days like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, which just recently passed, I saw some really good deals on a lot of PC parts, and thought I might as well look at all the different types of PC components and give my thoughts on the current state of the PC hardware market. There are a lot of great opportunities to build an epic gaming rig. Do note though that for the majority of my discussion, I'm going to be focusing on the mainstream desktop segment rather than the HETT segment, as that market, while still important, is quite niche. Now, when we take a look at CPUs, there are a ton of options to choose from, and that's great. This is mainly due to AMD's Ryzen CPUs taking the desktop DIY market by storm. I'm not just talking about the leap they made with the 3rd gen chips, but also the great deals on some of the previous generation chips, like the Ryzen 5 2600 or Ryzen 7 2700X. If there's one thing I want to get out of the way, it's the fact that I really don't see any viable reasons to recommend Intel anymore. Their whole desktop CPU family looks severely underwhelming to me, especially because here in Canada, their CPUs haven't really dropped too much in price. For Intel, there's quite a few factors at play here. One, despite getting absolutely hammered in terms of price to cores, they were still too stubborn to drop down prices of their mainstream desktop CPUs because they held and still hold a single core advantage, although ever so slightly. The other reason is probably because of the 14nm shortage they're going through, which has prevented them from having any wiggle room on their MSRPs for the chips. With 3rd gen Ryzen, AMD bumped up their clock speeds and also increased IPC over Zen Plus quite a bit, which allowed them to virtually close that single core gap with Intel. Not to mention, AMD solidified their lead when it came to core and thread count, thanks to their 7nm chiplet architecture design, allowing them to fit up to 16 cores on the AM4 package for the mainstream desktop segment. Like the i9-9900K is the only CPU from Intel's entire stack that I can see there being somewhat of a viable reason for someone purchasing it, and that is if you're a hardcore competitive esports gamer who plays on a 240Hz monitor and needs every frame they can get. But let's be real here, you can totally competitively play on a 3rd gen Ryzen CPU as well without any issues. As someone who runs a 144Hz monitor with their Ryzen system, I've been extremely content with my setup. I mean, when we look at specific CPU models, we've got the Ryzen 5 3600, a 6-core 12-threaded part, which in my opinion is the best bang for the buck CPU you can get on the market currently. For around $190, with this CPU you're effectively getting i7 8700K performance, but at almost half the price. Here in Canada, 8700Ks still retail for around $450, whereas for AMD, I've even seen some 3600Xs drop to $240. Not to mention, you do get coolers with AMD CPUs that are sufficient enough to run them at their stock configurations, whereas with Intel, you need to spend a little bit of extra money on a cooler as well. Moving up the stack, we have the Ryzen 7 3700X, which is a fantastic processor. With this CPU having 8 cores, 16 threads, decent boost speed, and great gaming performance as well as good productivity, it's excellent. It's a great all-rounder CPU. Plus the included Wraith Prism cooler is effective and aesthetically looks great as well. For $310, the Ryzen 7 3700X offers really good value as it provides comparable multi-core performance to Intel's i9-9900K and isn't really too far behind in regards to gaming. I would personally choose the 3700X over the competing 9700K simply because it costs less, offers better multi-core performance due to the 9700K only being a non-hyper-threaded part, and again, that cooler really goes a long way for most consumers. Moving up the stack, we can take a look at the Ryzen 9 3900X, which is the first CPU to be introduced by AMD as part of their new Ryzen 9 segment to take on the i9s from Intel. The 3900X and 9900K have had a lot of comparisons made out there. The 3900X is the CPU which I am currently running in my personal system, and I have zero regrets about choosing this processor, and wouldn't get a 9900K over it. If you're interested in a more in-depth review, then check out my channel for that. Both the 9900K and 3900X seem to hover around the same price, and like I said, the 9900K still holds the gaming advantage, but if you go and take a look at some of those benchmarks out there, the advantage is so minuscule that it's not something you would even notice. Most gamers buying these CPUs this expensive are probably running higher end GPUs like a 2080 Super or 5700 XT and playing at higher resolutions like 1440p where you're going to be more GPU bottlenecked anyways. Like I said, there are probably still those who play at 1080p with 240Hz monitors, but the 3900X can deliver in that regard as well, and I can 100% vouch for it. And that's just gaming. If you also want to do any productivity, high-end content creation, streaming, basically everything else on the side, the 3900X is a clear winner due to having 4 more cores and 8 more threads. It crushes the 9900K in multi-core performance, and even competes with HEDT CPUs from AMD's own Threadripper lineup and Intel's Skylake X lineup as well. From there on, if you needed to take it to the next level but still wanted to remain on AMD's mainstream platform, you've got AMD's recently released Ryzen 9 3950X, which is a 16-core, 32-threaded part which boosts to 4.7 GHz. At this point, I've basically just did a small recap of AMD's 3rd-gen lineup, because they offer great performance in all areas of computing and offer so much better value as opposed to Intel's 9th-gen CPUs. Now, earlier in this video, I also mentioned AMD's previous generation, and we can't forget about those CPUs either because they're still very viable options for the desktop market. If you can extend your budget and get a 3rd-gen Ryzen CPU, I would highly recommend you take that route. But if you are on a more restricted budget, I've seen some great deals on CPUs like the Ryzen 5 2600 and Ryzen 7 2700, which make them great options as well. These processors still offer really good gaming performance, and can even handle production work just fine as well. For example, I've seen the Ryzen 5 2600 listed from a local hardware retailer for just 99 Canadian dollars, which is absolutely insane value. When it comes to price to performance, you're seriously getting a lot for your money here, as it's still a 6-core 12-threaded CPU. It can run just fine on a B450 motherboard and can even be overclocked as well to bring out some extra performance. You can literally build yourself a fantastic gaming video editing machine with this CPU on a budget and even pair it with a mid-range GPU without running into any sort of bottlenecking issues. Honestly, I'm still to this day digesting the fact that you can get a CPU of that caliber at this price point, because just 3 years ago, this segment of the market was filled with Intel's dual-core Pentiums and i3s. Just goes to show you how badly Intel had stagnated the market and conditioned the consumers. Down over in the States, I've even seen Micro Centers selling the flagship Ryzen from the previous generation, that is the Ryzen 7 2700X for a mere $130. Have I mentioned insane value? Like seriously guys, this is 8 cores, 16 threads at this price point was just unheard of. But it's a great time to be alive, and what a heck of an option budget PC hardware enthusiasts have now on their hands. The opportunities now here feel almost limitless considering the options that were available at this price point not so long ago. Whether you're just looking to game, you want to stream, you're doing content creation, or you're doing a mix of everything, there is something for everyone. So similarly to CPUs, with motherboards, you guys can find a lot of options here that can meet your preferences. From my experience, vendors like Gigabyte, MSI, Asus, and ASRock all have a great selection. I've personally stuck with Gigabyte as my last 5 personal builds have had Gigabyte boards in them, and they've served me quite well with little to no issues. For AMD chips, you have 2 main routes you can take, and that is either going with a top-tier X570 motherboard or a more cost-effective B450 motherboard. The motherboards with the new X570 chipsets came out alongside the 3rd-gen Ryzen CPUs. The X570 chipset brings with it some cool new features such as support for PCI Express 4.0, which provides higher bandwidth and can utilize Gen 4 NVMEs that have blazing fast speeds. We're talking speeds of up to 5,000 megabytes per second. Along with that, a lot of new motherboards have top-notch VRMs on them, so if you're into overclocking and tweaking to get the most out of your system, these boards will be in your best interest for that extensive control. I've also seen a lot of these new boards that have integrated Wi-Fi use the new Wi-Fi 6 or AX standard, along with Bluetooth 5.0, which thank God it's finally available on a consumer motherboard. You'll find that the X570 boards start off at that mid $100 range and can definitely get up there in price for boards like the X570 Aorus Master or Crosshair Hero 8. Now, if you don't care about having all those features I mentioned, because let's face it, as nice as those X570 boards are, they are expensive. You can actually save quite a bit of money and get a B450 board, and it'll do the job just fine. In fact, power requirements for these 3rd-gen Ryzen chips aren't really that high, as they are very efficient thanks to 7nm. In many cases, my 3900X was less power hungry than my 8-core Ryzen 7 1800X. There are some really nice B450 boards out there that have solid VRMs on them, and are still loaded with plenty of features that the user can take advantage of, such as M.2 slots with NVMe support, Type-C USB, and thanks to BIOS updates, they can comfortably run 3rd gen Ryzen chips as well. MSI has some good boards such as the B450 Tomahawk Max and the B450 Gaming Pro Carbide. You've also got boards like the Aorus Pro Wi-Fi and Asus B450 ROG Strix, which would pair up very nicely with CPUs like the 3600 and 3700X. If you're going to be getting a 2nd gen Ryzen CPU, then you'll have nothing to worry about, as these boards will be able to run them to their full potential just fine. On the market, there are lots of great motherboards out there, so you definitely want to take a good look at some from each of the partners, evaluate their features, and settle for one that fits your needs and appeases your budget. In regards to memory, this is one area where prices have come down quite dramatically over the past year, so consumers can rejoice, as there are a lot of options here as well depending on what kind of configuration you're going for. Due to how cheap RAM has become, I would highly recommend getting a dual channel 16GB kit at the very least, since Windows 10 can be quite the resource hog of an operating system. Plus, with modern games becoming even larger with vast open worlds, with implementation of higher quality textures, the extra resources are definitely beneficial. These days, 8GB of RAM can be quite limiting, and modern games have shown a considerable boost in performance when running on a system with 16GB of total system memory compared to just 8GB of memory. 16GB is right now the sweet spot in my opinion. I have yet to find any games that push this configuration to the limit, and as someone who does a bit of content creation on the side as well, it is completely doable. For a Ryzen based system, I would highly suggest getting a 16GB kit with 2 8GB DIMMs to utilize that dual channel for the extra bandwidth, and also buying a kit that's clocked fairly high, at least 3000 MHz, as the way the Zen architecture is set up. These CPUs thrive off of fast memory. I've shown this in the past, and the faster memory you can give your Ryzen CPU, the better your gaming experience will be, especially if you can tune it to lower the timings and therefore decrease latency. And like I said, with how cheap RAM is these days, kits with these specs that I described are very affordable, ranging from as low as $50 to around $80. It's a lot more feasible than it was a while back. I remember back in 2017, I paid about $200 Canadian for my 16GB Samsung B-Die kit, and I thought that was expensive at the time, but still remember the prices jumping another $100 even after the fact. However, now, prices really have come down to earth, and there are some really great deals. Now, if your workload does consist of using a lot of productivity apps, then a 32GB kit of RAM will probably be more beneficial, and those kits I've seen range anywhere from around $130 to $180, depending on the configuration you're buying. So take into account what your needs are, and how resource heavy the tasks you do are, and buy the best kit of RAM accordingly. Just like with memory, storage, or more specifically solid state drives, have come down quite dramatically over the past year. I'm not going to lie, I feel really happy and kind of sad at the same time. Happy because you can get great high capacity NVMEs for cheap these days, but also as someone who paid like $400 for a Samsung 950 Pro back in early 2016, oh man, it stings a bit. NVMEs like the Samsung 970 EVO, Western Digital Black SN750, and the ADATA SX8200 Pro are all excellent choices, and depending on the capacity, you can find them going for great deals. There are also drives like the Intel 660p, Crucial P1, or the HP EX920, which offer great value. With how common M.2 slots are on motherboards, you might as well take advantage of them since they run off the PCI Express bus, which provides so much bandwidth than SATA. Therefore, these drives have the capability of being able to operate at much higher read and write speeds. This feature is especially great for content creators who need to rely on those speeds. Now, if all you're going to be doing is mostly gaming on your PC, you can skip out on an M.2 NVMe drive and save a bit of money by going with a regular old 2.5-inch SSD. This would still be plenty fast for your day-to-day tasks and gaming. I would highly recommend going to the SSD route for your main boot drive, as it makes your operating system so much snappier and boot times will be much lower than your typical mechanical drive. If you can't afford a 1TB SSD, then I would suggest getting at least a 500GB or 250GB drive, and then throwing in a 1TB or 2TB mechanical drive for your mass storage and all the rest of your games. That way your OS, along with your main programs, will be on the faster drive, and the rest can go on the hard drive where the speed isn't necessarily a concerning factor. Moving on to graphics cards, and this is one area of the PC hardware market which I am not particularly happy with at the moment. I think it's actually in a pretty dire spot at the moment, probably the worst generation we've stumbled upon. These current generation of cards from both Nvidia and AMD have, in my opinion, been severely underwhelming. I've went into more detail about why I feel this way in previous videos, which I'll link below if you're interested, but to summarize, these current graphics cards aren't really that much faster than the previous generation. They didn't bring a performance bump one would expect from a new generation, but despite that, prices increased, and what ended up happening was that the cards that offered the same performance as previous gen cards either ended up costing the same, if not even more. NVIDIA introduced the RTX 20 series back in August of 2018, and their biggest selling point was the capability of doing ray tracing. Ray tracing is a really cool piece of technology, and I do strongly believe it'll be the way most games will head in the future. However, we're over a year since the release, and not too many games out there have support for those features yet. Along with that, turning on ray tracing effects causes a very steep performance drop. So if you're looking for the smoothest gameplay experience, you're probably going to want to avoid those features anyways. I think the technology is kind of ahead of its time right now. Now, NVIDIA did somewhat alleviate the poor performance jump by refreshing the RTX 20 series with the Super cards, where cards like the 2070 Super deliver 1080 Ti-like performance at a lower price point. And in my opinion, it's what the 20 series should have been originally to begin with, but at least the prices didn't go up, and you're getting more performance here for your dollar, so there's that. Now, everyone was riding on the wait for Navi bandwagon like they always do with Radeon graphics cards, and AMD pretty much went ahead and joined NVIDIA in the price hikes. Originally, when the 5700 XT and 5700 were announced, they had higher MSRP, but when NVIDIA announced the super cards, they had to quickly retaliate by lowering prices. AMD's vice president and GM of the Radeon Technologies Group was quick to post "Jebaited" on Twitter, giving off this impression that they tricked NVIDIA, but really it was them scrambling to make their cards look more attractive. Regardless, the 5700 XT and 5700 do offer better value, as you're getting 2070 Super Performance and 2060 Super Performance, just minus the ray tracing features at a lower price point. It's a step in the right direction, but overall this market isn't in the best spot. But at the end of the day, what other options do you really have anyways? So just pick out a graphics card that best fits your budget and call it a day. Now, aside from all those components I just discussed, the only things that are really left on the list would be a power supply, case, and CPU cooler, which is optional if your CPU already comes with a cooler, or if you have an unlocked K-SKU processor from Intel. When it comes to cases, I don't really have a specific recommendation here. As long as it provides good ample airflow, there's an adequate amount of room to work in to accommodate all the components, cable management is good, it appeals to you visually, and is quiet, then that's all that really matters. Cases can range anywhere from as low as $30 to as much as $250, so pick one depending on what your needs are. With power supplies, I have 4 brands I recommend, and those are Seasonic, EVGA, Corsair, and Be Quiet. They make excellent units that are built with top quality grade components. For the last 5 years, I've been using an EVGA 750 G2 SuperNOVA power supply, and it's been holding up very well, as I've used it in 4 builds so far, and all of which that have been overclocked with high-end components pushed to the limit. So you will want to assess which components you're using. The 2 main components you want to focus on are the CPU and GPU, then add another 150 to 200 watts just to be on the safe side, and pick out a power supply that has the right amount of wattage. In terms of efficiency rating, the higher you can get, the better, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should spring for a platinum rated PSU. A gold or bronze rated unit can do the job just fine. Now, in regards to CPU coolers, you can either skip this part, or if you want to go with a more robust cooling solution that will help lower your temps and decrease noise, then it might be in your best interest to go with an aftermarket unit. If you're looking for a good air cooling option, then Noctua, Be Quiet, Cooler Master, and Deepcool have some pretty cool options. If you want to go with an AIO, I highly recommend checking out NZXT Kraken coolers, Corsair Hydro Series, and Deepcool as well. They've been coming out with some pretty good cost-effective options. So hopefully that gives you guys a good insight on the current state of the PC market, and why I believe it's a great time to be building a new gaming rig or to do an upgrade. There are lots of great options in many of the PC component categories and for great prices. If you guys are planning on doing a build or getting some parts, I'll leave some affiliate links down below, and if you want, you can even check out my Amazon storefront where I have some components listed out in categories that I recommend. I will be making a follow-up video where I'll be going through a few builds myself with parts I recommend at various budgets and use cases, so be on the lookout for that. If you guys found this video to be informative and helpful, leave a like, let me know your thoughts down below, and if you're interested in more content like this, then make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.